This podcast episode is releasing during the United States 4th of July holiday weekend. I'm going to rebroadcast one of my favorite episodes from 2020, which was, What is your mindset right now? Are you ready to change it? This is a discussion I had with my good friend, coach, and former therapist, Diann Wingert. I think it's an excellent listen to begin the second half of 2022. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 277 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for a discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. This podcast episode is releasing during the U.S. 4th of July holiday weekend. I'm going to rebroadcast one of my favorite episodes from 2020, which was, What is your mindset right now? Are you ready to change it? This discussion I had with my good friend, coach, and former therapist, Diann Wingert. I think this is an excellent listen to begin the second half of 2022. Diann has been on the podcast 3 times to discuss mindset issues and what triggers your brain. These episodes are some of the most downloaded in history of the podcast, and I'm going to include links to all those episodes. This episode was the first where we discussed mindset issues and how to overcome them. I've edited down the episode as I'm working on making the episode shorter. I am going to skip my normal promo for the Career Pivot community and get right to my discussion with Diann Wingert. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having Diann Wingert on the podcast today, and we're going to talk about mindset issues. Welcome to the podcast.
I've been really looking forward to this, Mark. Thank you for inviting me.
Diann coaches entrepreneurs. I wanted to talk about mindset issues. When we talk about mindset, Diann, what are we talking about?
Well, let me set this up by saying I am currently a coach. As you say, I work with predominantly female entrepreneurs. But prior to that, in a former life, I was a psychotherapist for a long time. And a lot of the people that I saw would come for therapy during times of transition. One of the transition points I would see with a lot of folks at midlife was they either reached a point of impasse in their career where they just didn't want to be there anymore, or they got pushed out. And while many of them had incredible skills and loads of expertise, their mindset, the way they thought about where they were and the road ahead, got in their way. When I talk about mindset, some of the listeners may be familiar with the book by Carol Dweck, Growth Mindset. And in this book, Carol Dweck says there's really 2 ways that people show up in the world and look at life. One is a fixed mindset where they want things to be predictable, safe, secure, and pretty much to stay the same. The growth mindset is able to embrace change, whether it's desired and sought after or unintended, like the situation that the whole world is in right now. And if you are able to have a growth mindset, which luckily can be cultivated, you are able to kind of go with the flow when things are uncertain and unpredictable. And I think for right now, that is something everybody needs to work on.
What do you think are the most common problems?
Okay. So I like to think of mindset traps or thought errors. Lots of times people, it's not even so much the thoughts that they're thinking that get in their way. It's what they make them mean. And I'll give you an example. The brain has a negativity bias. And what that means is, in order for us to survive since the good old days in the caves, we needed to be more adept at paying attention when things went wrong than when things went right. Because the scary stuff, the dangerous stuff, the really, really bad stuff, the kind of stuff that could get you killed and make your whole tribe become extinct, your brain needed to be wired in such a way that that stuff stood out more and was more memorable. Well, we still have that negativity bias. So, for example, let's say you have long-term employment, 10 years in a row, you get an excellent performance review. The only one that's going to stick in your craw is the one where it says meet standards instead of exceeds. So I think the types of mindset traps or thought errors that we have, I like to put into a couple of categories. One is the triple P: perfectionism, procrastination, and people pleasing. And the other ones that don't rhyme, too bad I couldn't make that work, are things like imposter complex, analysis paralysis, and fear of failure. Do any of those sound familiar? Have you heard some of those things from the people you work with?
Oh, yes. And I've even suffered from some of them.
Of course you have. You're human after all. Now, the trick is, do you know why these things get in our way later in life?
Well, my guess is it gets us to simply not to take a step forward.
That's really what it comes down to. And I think sometimes these things can be very sneaky. Now, let's take imposter complex. Some people refer to it as imposter syndrome. And by the way, it's not a clinical diagnosis, so you don't need treatment for this. Imposter complex or imposter syndrome basically refers to the fact that in spite of your accomplishments, in spite of your achievements, in spite of your track record, no matter how much expertise, experience, accolades, or degrees you might have accumulated, when you're about to do something new for the first time, like start a business in your 50s or beyond, you may be plagued with thoughts: who am I to go into business? Or who am I to, let's say, many people choose coaching or consulting because the upfront costs are less. Let's be honest. Who am I to be a life coach, a business coach, a retirement coach? Who am I to be an expat consultant? Who am I? And what's so fascinating to me about this, Mark, is the people who are most likely to have this thought pattern that we call imposter complex are the most highly qualified. They're not the people that have done the least amount and just barely skated by, were never stellar at anything. It's actually the people who many people even find intimidating because they always seem to excel. It's an interesting thought that the folks who have the most to offer are the ones who are shaky in the knees when they think about going out and offering their services.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. What this brings up for me is throughout my career, I've never let questioning myself to get me to stop going forward. So it's interesting. Starting in late January, I'm going to start offering a course on amava.com. It'll be on how to become an expat, the thought process.
I love it.
And people go, what? You would do what? I said, yeah, I've been writing about it for 2 years. By the way, I'm doing the course with them to help me get my head around the ideas so I can go back to Susan Leahy, my co-author, who's now in Porto, Portugal, so we can go write a book. I wouldn't have thought about doing that a year ago.
Well, and you're bringing up another point, which is that we have to be open, willing, and even embrace the fact that life requires continuous personal evolution. And now it seems to be requiring continuous professional evolution. Once upon a time earlier in our lifetimes, many of us could look forward to staying with one company or at least one career path for all of our working life. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And I think for those who expected that would be their occupational pedigree. I go to a good school, I get a degree, I sign on with a good company with the stable benefits, and I just stay there until retirement. And that's the deal I signed up for. And those are the people that are very unprepared when they're shown the door in a RIF or other circumstances. And in order to move forward, one of the mindset changes they have to make is to release the negative thoughts and feelings about it. In other words, it's a loss, and we do have to process a loss, especially if it was traumatic, unexpected, sudden, embarrassing. But if we continue to hold on to thoughts that this wasn't supposed to happen to me, I was supposed to retire there, this isn't fair, while those thoughts are totally understandable, perfectly natural, and entirely human, they don't serve us well because they actually interfere with our ability to move forward. As long as we're looking over our shoulder at what was and what we think should have been, you can't be looking in two directions at once. Life now requires us to look forward, even if it's a scary proposition.
Yeah, there's no question that COVID has thrown us out of our comfort zone.
Big time. I am very grateful that I made the change to working online prior to COVID, because it is an adjustment. There's no question about it. Changing careers. I've been self-employed for 10 years, but I changed careers from therapy to coaching several years ago. I thought it was going to be a much smaller deal than it was. I thought, oh, what's the big deal? I was a therapist. Now I'll be a coach. I'll still be helping people. I was working with people face to face. Now I'll be working with them online. No big deal. What I didn't account for, Mark, and I think I really felt I was doing something wrong. And the fact that I felt sort of stuck and uncertain, and I didn't have my normal level of confidence about things, was because I didn't appreciate until I was on the other side that it's actually an identity transformation. And if you are accustomed to working in one way and then you work another, even if it's a change that you really wanted, it was your idea, it can kind of sneak up on you when you realize, I'm struggling with this.
Yeah, last week I had Dr. Greg Lunsford, who wrote the book Exit from Work.
Yes.
And one of the things he talked about is people very often view themselves in one of three ways: by their profession, doctor, lawyer, by their role in a company, or is the corporate brand. In other words, working, like, for example, I worked for IBM, or today, if you work for Google, or you'll work for Nike.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are spit out, whether you are laid off, you leave a particular company, or you're no longer going to be you're being kicked out of your profession, there's a certain branding that we have. There's a certain, just simply how we see ourselves.
Identity.
Yes.
And you know what's so fascinating to me about this is I wouldn't have expected this, Mark. I would have expected that if you get pushed out, if you age out, and this is sadly more often the case with women, ageism is alive and well, especially in the US and in any of the glamour industries. Women get pushed out, and when they start looking no longer young. But I think what I would have expected is if you get laid off, if you get fired, if your job is eliminated, you're told your services are no longer necessary, or one of my favorites, we're moving in another direction. I would have thought, okay, this is a crisis. This is a loss. Of course, your identity is going to be in a process of change that will be more uncomfortable than not for a while. But what I was really surprised to learn is that identity change can be a real struggle, take a long time, and be very disruptive to your functioning, even if you initiated the change. And the way I learned that is my husband is an academic physician. He really excelled in his career. He was very successful, very effective, very well acknowledged. But after the years he had put in, he didn't want to do it anymore. He wanted to continue to use many of his skills. He just didn't want to be an academic physician. So several years later, he was finally able to leave that position and start working for a global research company from home, which allowed us to move and live in a location he much prefers. But wouldn't you know, we're going on 2 years now, and I can see it so clearly. His identity is still really struggling for significance because as a physician, a physician leader in particular, you know who you are, and so does everyone else. But in his new role, he's kind of like, how exactly do I explain to people what I do? So I think people need to understand that it takes time to change our identity, whether wanted or not, and we need to be forgiving and gracious with ourselves while we're going through it.
So what process can people learn how to grasp this new identity?
Well, I think maybe this is because of my therapy background, but I think that lots of times people can enter into these changes without fully comprehending what it's going to put them through. There are some factors that I think do play a role in how you are going to perceive this identity change. For example, did you jump or were you pushed? When you jump, sometimes you've already got a plan and you already know where you intend to land. But if you got pushed, you probably didn't see it coming, or even if you did, you still didn't think it was going to happen to you. So you're not mentally prepared for what comes next. I also think any particular individual's risk tolerance, like, are you a conservative investor, a moderate investor, an aggressive investor? How prepared are you for the emotional ups and downs of uncertainty? How comfortable are you, or how uncomfortable are you with taking risks and trying new things? What is your relationship with failure? Meaning, there are people who can try something new, do horrible at it, and then shrug their shoulders and say, well, of course I suck. It's the first time. But then there are other people that will say, stupid, stupid, stupid. What was I thinking? I should have never done that. I look like a complete moron. So I think how personal some people take it when they try something new and it doesn't work out the way they want. I like to say it's not what you do, it's what you make it mean. And your relationship with failure can be changed. I tell people, to the best of your ability, try to change like a Buddha. Meaning, if you're going to do something new, be open to whatever happens, including the fact you're going to fall on your face. Be curious about the experience. Oh, I wonder what this is going to be like. And I wonder what aspects of myself it's going to reveal to me that maybe I haven't had a reason to look at before. And the most important part, be non-judgmental. Like, there's nothing wrong with you if you don't happen to be good at something new right away. In fact, you shouldn't count on it. You should expect that it's an experiment. And I like the mindset mantra. There is either success or feedback. You do something and it either works, and then you're like, well, great, I'm going to keep doing that. Or you get the feedback that it didn't go as well as you thought. So what am I going to do now? Make a slight modification, go back to the drawing board. I think that the identity change can happen more quickly if we can embrace a child's mind. Now, I do happen to be a practicing Buddhist. It's something I embraced about a decade ago because of a serious car accident that left me with a chronic pain problem. And after all the drugs and procedures and very scary things had been done to me and I was still in pain, I needed to find something that was going to work. And the doctor suggested meditation. Well, that eventually led me to embrace Buddhism. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is that a child's mind is a Buddhist concept. And to be able to approach something new like a child means that you are not expecting anything of yourself based on past performance. In other words, let's say you decide, I'm going to buy a franchise. Now, nobody's buying a restaurant right now because of our current situation, but let's say for the sake of the example, I'm going to buy a Togo's, or I'm going to buy and I never pronounce that right. Is it Togo's or To-Go's? I don't know. But let's say you buy a franchise because you feel more secure buying kind of a business in a box rather than starting everything from scratch and figuring all that stuff out. You've never run a business before. You've certainly never run any kind of a fast food business. A beginner's mind would say, this is going to be an adventure. It may take me longer than I think it should to figure it out. The franchisor doesn't want me to fail any more than I want to fail. So if I stick with it and I can laugh at my mistakes and just not give up, it's going to be fine. We put ourselves under a whole lot of pressure when we say, I was a CFO of a Fortune 100 company. I should be able to run a damn franchise. Well, it's a totally different identity. It's a totally different way of life, totally different skill sets. And while you can transfer a lot in with you, you're not going to be great from day one.
One of the things I always tell people is you have to go in with this attitude of, I'm going in, this is an adventure. I'm going to go in and learn. I'm not the smartest guy on the block. I'm going to have to ask for help. As a guy, I don't like asking for direction, so asking for help is...
Well, for the record, as a girl, I don't like asking for help either.
And so it's one of these things of, and even if you start a business, because I've gone through this the last couple of years, there are going to be big bumps in the road.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'm doing right now is I'm doing a series of blog posts, and one should have come out last week, on switching industries.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, is really hard. And because we're going to have industries that just simply are going to die.
Yeah, they're going to disappear.
We're going to have some industries like tourism and hospitality, they're going to have to morph a lot. We're going to have in fact, I was just talking with a gentleman. I was asking him, he's in the ag sales business. And I was asking him what trends he was seeing. And he said, by the way, there's a big change in the potato business.
Who knew?
Right. You sell big potatoes for making French fries. Now everyone's cooking at home. You need small potatoes.
Oh my gosh, who would have ever thought of that?
What the hell do I know?
Right?
Well, he just got a card from Jehovah's Witnesses telling them that they can't go door to door, so they're now mailing flyers. Thought that even religion's being affected.
Well, it's so interesting. I was just talking with one of my clients yesterday who has been very successful in her field, and about a dozen years ago decided to go out on her own, hang on her own shingle, become a service-based agency and a consultancy. And it's gone well until very recently. And our conversation was about what are the trends in your industry and in other adjacent industries with respect to technology and how technology is disrupting the work that's being done and by whom. Well, she didn't know. And I said, well, then that's our assignment for the week is you need to do some research and don't just Google yourself to death, make some phone calls. And because there are people who know, but you haven't been concerned about this yet. And I think this always brings up how many people in our age group, in our generation, feel about technology. There are some of us that it's almost their first love and it's a non-issue. They're in the minority, as you know. There are others that think, well, heck, I'm going to have to go with the flow or I'm going to end up in the La Brea tar pits. I got to embrace this stuff. I got to figure it out. I got to learn it. And so they're sort of grudgingly accepting it. But most of the people I know, Mark, are sort of in the middle thinking, do I really have to? And is there some way that I can keep on doing what I'm doing without having to get involved with all this technology? And I may be wrong, Mark, but I think it's something that we all need to change our mindset about, because I think in 10 years' time, if we are still planning to work then, I don't know any industry that is not at least going to be touched by technology, and many of them will be completely transformed by it and already are in the process of doing so.
If you'll go back, for my listeners, if you'll go back, I believe it was episode 201 or 202, where I interviewed Chris Farrell, who's an economist and a personal finance writer. And he talked about the fact that the digital revolution has been in motion for 10, 15 years. COVID has kicked it in overdrive.
Absolutely true.
What that has also done has opened up the possibilities of literally you can work for anybody from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Diann, I think where are you now?
Well, I was in Los Angeles my entire life. My husband is from a little village in southern Germany. He's been in the US for about 25 years. And we decided within weeks of him accepting a remote executive job with this research company that since we could, it's actually been almost 2 years this Christmas, come to think of it, we will both be working full-time from home. We have kind of a small house in Los Angeles, and we would be on each other's nerves if we try to do it there. So since we can work from home and home could be anywhere, where do we want it to be? 4 weeks later, we were closing escrow on a townhouse just outside of Portland, Oregon, and we're able to buy a condo about half the size of our main house on the Oregon coast. So we now divide our time between the bigger house that has enough space for each of us to have our own office and the much smaller one that is literally right on the Oregon coast. My husband tends to like to work from there. I tend to like to work from here. He stays there, has been there since COVID started, and I go back and forth about a week at a time. And it's working really well for us that way.
Well, you're in Portland. I'm outside of Guadalajara, Mexico. We're recording this over the internet using Zoom. The cost is negligible. You couldn't do this 10 years ago.
Not only that, I think the technology I was not a tech enthusiast. I would say 5 years ago, Mark, I wasn't exactly tech phobic, but I was very suspicious of the whole thing, especially suspicious of my ability to adapt to it and to keep up in any meaningful way. I saw the opportunity, the flexibility, and the freedom, and I thought, this is not serving me to think I can't do this, or this is too hard, or I'm too old, or it's too late, or I'm not tech savvy. My frequent thought 5 years ago was, well, I'm just not tech savvy, so that's not going to happen for me. And one day I thought, I'm looking at all these businesses going online. I'm looking at all these people with their laptop lifestyle, the digital nomads, people running all over the place, working from their laptop, wherever they may be. And I thought, why should I miss out on that just because I've got this idea in my head that I'm not tech savvy? Well, it's not just mindset. Although I have worked on my mindset, I immediately swapped that thought, I'm not tech savvy, for this one. I am getting better and better at learning technology every day. And that turned out to be true. What's also true is that there are many companies that didn't exist 5 years ago that are making technology easier, simpler, more user-friendly, absolutely accessible to anyone our age who is open and willing to try. For example, I launched my own podcast 6 months ago. And the initial hosting platform that I chose did not seem user-friendly to me, seemed very complicated, very confusing. And I paid the fees month after month after month. I did not launch a podcast. I was completely intimidated by it. Then I found out about another platform and I thought, this can't do the same thing. This is so easy, a kid could do it. I immediately switched and I've been happy ever since. So I think that was one of the other thoughts. Instead of just trying something once, having it not come easily, taking that to mean I can't do it, I'm not tech savvy, I suck, I better give up, take my toys home. I thought you know what? This platform may not be the right one for me. Let me look and see what else is available. And I think with all the people that have gone home during this quarantine and pandemic, and the fact that it's far from over, more and more companies are going to be making more and more accessible technology. So I think the opportunity for people our age to have an online business with zero prior experience has never been better.
How did you get started with your online business?
I should be embarrassed to admit this, but I think the older I get, the more I can laugh at myself. When I was still a therapist, at one point in time, a number of years ago, I was working with a lot of college students. I was also working with a lot of people in the entertainment industry. And those in the industry, when they're in between projects, they want to see you every day. And all of a sudden, the pilot season starts and everybody just disappears. And kids going to high school and college, they may be working with you the summer before they go off to whatever East Coast college they're going to go to, and then they're gone. In the case of the folks in the entertainment industry and the college students, the work was underway face to face, and then they were leaving, but they didn't want to end the relationship and find someone else. So my therapy clients started saying, well, couldn't we just FaceTime? Or could we Skype? Or could we just continue to meet on the phone? And my first reaction, Mark, was, that's not going to be the same. Well, of course not. That's the whole point. But that was my gut level reaction. That's not going to be the same. And here's a demonstration of a fixed mindset right here. That's not going to be the same. How's that going to work? I don't want to do it. Those thoughts just went bing, bang, boom. Just showed up in my mind, one right after the other. And because we all listen to our thoughts and we believe them, I said, yeah, I don't know. And they're like, so I can't see you anymore? And I thought, that would be kind of dumb. Like, I like this client. They like me. They want to continue working with me. I'd like to continue working with me. So it's my mindset, my fear of change, and my fixed thinking that's standing in the way. And I recognized that, fortunately, before they left the office. And I said, you know what? I don't know if you're going to be satisfied with it, but let's give it a try. And I think that sort of life's an experiment, life's an adventure. You never know how anything is going to be. I don't know about you, but I thought I knew what marriage was going to be like. Wrong. I thought I knew what parenting was going to be like. Wrong, wrong, wrong. I got 3 kids. I mean, I always thought I knew what something was going to be like, but I realized you only thought you knew because you had some sort of idea, some sort of expectation. But once you actually did it, it may have been similar, but it was never exactly the same. So I was introduced to the possibility of working online by clients. I wish I could say I thought of it myself, but I didn't. And then once I started doing it, I thought, well, is this as effective? And do they like it? And do I like it? And then the day that changed everything, because I was still kind of like, I don't know. I had a strong identity as a therapist. And as a therapist, you sit in an office, you sit on your chair, they sit on the couch, you face each other, you have a pen and paper, they have a pained look on their face. I mean, everybody knows their role. you do your part. I'm being a little facetious, but it was like I was a little bit too stuck in that role, in that identity, in my mind. This is the way therapy happens. Well, here we are 5 years later. I work exclusively online. Now, the fact is, I'm no longer a therapist. I'm a coach. I still help people. And now, most people signing up for therapy for the first time are either doing it virtually because therapists are not in their offices, or they're doing text-based therapy, email-based therapy, FaceTime therapy. That's becoming the way it's done. Now, there'll always be people who like traditional face-to-face psychotherapy, but the day that changed everything was when I had a client who was local, who had the option to continue seeing me face-to-face, said, do you think we can just Skype? Because the traffic here is kind of a pain in the butt and the parking isn't always available. And I was like, wait a minute. This isn't even an issue that you're going to be on the East Coast or you're going to be shooting a film in another country. You're going to be 10 minutes away and you'd rather see me through the computer screen. And I thought, Diann, you need to open your mind. The world is changing. You need to change with it. And so I did.
Well, it's interesting. One of the women in my online community, the Career Pivot community, she works for a nonprofit that's in drug and alcohol abuse and counseling. And they're actually seeing an improvement in outcomes. And I've read this from several other places where moving online and moving to videos, actually it's removed barriers from people seeing their therapist.
Well, one of them, I'll tell you, I mean, for people, because I've worked with people over the years at all different points on the spectrum. One thing for sure, regardless of what they were seeing you for, when I would go down the hallway from the inner office down the hallway to go collect my client from the waiting room. It was a beautifully appointed office, Pasadena, California. Very, very nice. Every single time I would go out to the waiting room to collect my client. And of course, there would be other people in the waiting room because it was in a suite that had one psychiatrist and 4 or 5 therapists. We each had our own office, but the clients would be sitting there waiting. They would always have their head down, either looking at a book, looking at their phone, looking in their lap. They did not want to make eye contact with anyone. I'm sorry to say that here we are, 2020, almost 2021. There is still stigma about mental health. And as we sort of joked earlier, there's just a bad feeling that most humans have about asking for help of any kind and receiving it. The privacy of being able to meet with a coach, a therapist, a consultant, a teacher, a guide, a guru, a healer, whatever, through your computer means whatever shame, whatever embarrassment, whatever discomfort you may have about asking for and receiving help is going to, of course, be reduced. Wouldn't you think?
You betcha. I want to close this out with, if you had one piece or 1 or 2 pieces of advice, because no one ever has one, for someone who's suddenly going, okay, I've got one of these mindset issues. What advice do you have for them?
First and foremost, you should congratulate yourself because it means you're probably human. No, I'm joking. Everybody has mindset issues. There is actually an expression, new level, new devil. And what that means is that we don't just work on mindset issues until we're fixed or until they all go away and then we're in the clear. Every time we stretch, every time we grow, every time we expand our comfort zone, which hopefully will be continuous throughout life, we come up against new mindset blocks. Other people will call them limiting beliefs. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is you can't believe everything you think. Just because you're thinking, I can't do this, I'm going to fail, I'm going to suck, who am I? Just because you're thinking it doesn't make it so. Chances are it's a thought that you've been thinking ever since you were a little kid in one way, shape, or form, and your brain just got hooked on it, and it just keeps showing up. That's point 1. And point 2 is that it's never too late to change your mind about who you are. If you have always wanted to do something, but were afraid to fail, like by not letting yourself do it, you're already failing. You're already disappointing yourself. So I think if we can embrace the prospect that, like we both said earlier, life can be an adventure when failure is risk-free. There is no failure. There's feedback. You try, it either works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you try something else. But just because you fail doesn't mean you're a failure. That is a thought that will always be a mindset block. It's a thought that's totally optional. One of the other things I encourage people to do, and For those who have heard of affirmations before, they've been around forever. There was the whole New Age movement where everyone was doing their vision boards and their affirmations. So a lot of people may cringe when they hear the sound of it. But let me tell you, and let me share a resource. There's a free app called Think Up. Has a little orange icon with a little white sprig of something. Think Up has a free and a paid version. The free is perfectly adequate. What I have people do is you record affirmations in your own voice. You get 4 at the free version. That's enough. So, Mark, the reason why I recommend this Think Up app is that all of us have been thinking the thoughts, I'm not smart, I'm not strong, I'm not brave, I've never done this before, I'm too old for this stuff. All of the thoughts that we're thinking, which are normal thoughts, but they definitely stand in our way. And if we keep on thinking them, they will absolutely hold us back. The trick to being able to move forward, even if you're scared, is to think better thoughts and to be able to take action, even though you're scared. So I like to encourage people to use the Think Up app to speed up the process. And the reason why it works is instead of somebody else telling you, well, just think this or think that instead of what you're thinking, even if they're right, even if you want to, your brain will still resist it because your brain will always prefer its own thoughts over influence from someone else. So with the Think Up app, you record these affirmations in your own voice. And then I have my clients listen to it in the morning, kind of like background music while they're going about their morning routines. And then again at night. In a way, it's kind of subliminally changing the way they think. And it's also not a bad idea to repeat them out loud. What you're basically doing is swapping out the thoughts like, I'm going to fail, I'm too old, this is outside my wheelhouse, I'm not tech savvy, whatever the thoughts are. Thinking better thoughts and practicing doing so can actually give you that little bit of courage and confidence to take action on moving forward instead of giving in to the analysis paralysis and imposter complex, which is likely to happen if you're not thinking better thoughts. Make sense?
That's a good place to stop.
Sounds good.
Diann, if someone wanted to reach out and touch you virtually,
of course,
and obviously listen to your podcast, how might they do that?
Well, the name of the podcast is The Driven Woman, and it's for ambitious women who are falling short of their goals. They can also contact me through my website, which is DiannWingertCoaching.com. The podcast lives there, as does a blog and a bunch of other things. If they are ready to make some changes in their life and think I'm the one for them, we do a 30-minute free consultation before any of that can happen. And there's a link to that also on DiannWingertCoaching.com.
Well, Diann, thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
It was my pleasure. I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
I would encourage you to listen to this episode a couple of times. It got me thinking. You also heard me discuss at the end of 2022, I was starting to teach a workshop for Mamava.com on the thought process of becoming an expat. I ran this workshop multiple times, but the interest was not there. I also did a lot of keyword research and determined there was not a market for my approach. A lot of people want to give being an expat a try, but most do not want to approach it the way I did, which in my opinion is why about 50% return home in less than 5 years. I tried it, it didn't pan out, and I moved on to the next project. As Diann says, there is success and then there is learning. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the weekly Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. I just published my latest white paper, Ageism, the Last Acceptable Bias. If you are subscribed to the newsletter, you've already had the opportunity to download it. If you subscribe now, you will get it in the next newsletter. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on Facebook and LinkedIn. You'll also find me on Twitter at Career Pivot. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-277. You can subscribe to the podcast, or on Apple Podcasts, you follow it on Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.